They thought humanity would stay silent, that we would accept it, bow our heads, and continue begging for a seat at their table. But when Dr. Ilara Miles, Earth's first and only envoy to the Galactic Council, was executed live on pan-galactic broadcast for crimes against interstellar peace, they forgot what we truly are underneath the politics, the treaties, the forced humility. We are vengeance. We are fury wrapped in flesh and bone. We are the species that built nukes before we built peace. And they just reminded us what that version of us is capable of. Ilara stood trial on Virexis Prime, a shining marble of civilization where the Galactic Council resided. A place humans weren't even allowed to orbit without explicit permission. The charges against her were fabricated. Subversive diplomacy. Espionage by emotional manipulation. Speciesist rhetoric in a multigalactic forum. They said she used Earth's traumatic history to guilt other species into passing favorable legislation, as if telling the truth about human suffering was a crime. But the worst part wasn't the trial. It was how she begged them to listen. She wasn't defiant. She wasn't angry. She still believed in their system, that if she explained herself calmly, with logic, they'd understand. She pleaded for justice, and for that, for her hope, they killed her. The feed went dark seconds after the pulse blade tore through her neck. No statement, no apology, just silence. And then the council pretended it never happened. Back on Earth, the silence didn't last. President Rao, a former pacifist-turned-war strategist overnight, addressed the United Planetary broadcast with her hair unbraided, her eyes fire-lit. They executed peace, she said, so we activate vengeance. The war declaration wasn't formal. There were no ambassadors called home, no negotiation attempts, no ultimatum, just a transmission sent across every council-registered communication channel. One phrase in hundreds of alien languages. You will pay. The stars were no longer safe. Earth fleet, long mocked as primitive and outdated by the Council, emerged from the Sol system like awakened titans. Ships that had never been officially acknowledged, classified stealth dreadnoughts, black hole jump destroyers, quantum armor suits, began to appear on Council border worlds. And then came Project Revenant. Officially, it never existed. But those who saw its wake told stories that couldn't be discredited. Ships vanishing mid-warp, planets experiencing gravity implosions, Council AI networks getting infected with human emotion simulators, causing them to self-terminate from psychological overload. They called us monsters. Yet they were the ones who killed the woman who came in peace. Among the first retaliation targets was Tenebrix 4, a resource hub supplying half the Council's food processors. The humans didn't send an army. They sent one man. Captain Darius Wolf, a dishonorably discharged veteran from the Titan Uprising. He landed alone, requested immediate surrender, and when they refused, he triggered a sonic tremor device that shattered the planet's crust. The planet didn't surrender. It sunk. He was never seen again. Some say he became part of Project Revenant. Others believe he died with Tenebrix. But his message was clear. We asked to be equal. Now, you'll learn what happens when we're enemies. The Council scrambled. Some races called for negotiations. Others demanded more executions. But the unity they boasted about fractured like glass under pressure. They didn't understand. They'd never fought a species like us. A species that evolved with death around every corner. A species that turned extinction into innovation. Humanity didn't wait. We never do. The fleets split into autonomous squads. Each targeted a different core system. Not to destroy. Not yet. To dismantle. To humiliate. To show them what it feels like to be at the mercy of a species that remembers every scar, every betrayal. Because vengeance isn't just about killing. It's about making sure they remember why they should have never messed with Earth. The first world to fall wasn't one of strategic value. It was symbolic. Carnaxus, home of the Varen High Chancellor who signed Ilara's execution order, became the face of galactic arrogance. It was a city-planet, built from the bones of hollowed moons, glittering with wealth drawn from centuries of resource exploitation. They thought their status and technology made them untouchable. Humanity didn't attack the capital directly. That would have been merciful. Instead, Earthfleet disabled the planet's orbital grid in under 12 minutes. Communications fell first, then food supply drones, then the climate regulators. In less than an hour, Carnaxus, once boasting the title of most stable planet in the inner sector, was plunged into controlled chaos. They didn't even know humans were there until emergency broadcasts picked up 3 chilling words, repeated in monotone across every frequency. "This is for Ilara." Panic set in. Varens, once smug and secure in their power, fought each other in the streets for protein packs. Their High Chancellor vanished. Some say he fled to a council bunker. Others believe he died choking on his own pride when the heat shields failed and the skies burned orange with plasma storms. This wasn't war. This was message writing. And it was working. In the council chambers, panic disguised itself as outrage. Species that had mocked humans in open forums were now demanding an emergency summit. Accusations flew. Who gave the kill order? Why wasn't Earth watched more closely? Why did no one realize how much power they were hiding? But they forgot something crucial. Humans weren't hiding power. We were hiding restraint. In the shadows of their indecision, Earthfleet's operations expanded. Operations were no longer centralized. There was no chain of command to intercept. Every captain had autonomy. Every soldier had a target. Every ship moved with a vengeance that didn't need permission. Operation Widowmaker, led by Admiral Nyla Choi, was the next phase. Her squadron entered the Kalex Convergence, an artificial wormhole system guarded by the Tavarians, bioengineered telepaths with hive mind tactics. Choi didn't use force. She used history. Her team hacked into the Convergence's neural link, broadcasting centuries of human trauma into the collective mind. War, famine, slavery, genocide, betrayal, and the execution of an unarmed diplomat. The Tavarians screamed themselves into silence. Their fleet disbanded. Their world turned inward. No shots were fired. Word spread faster than light. Humans didn't just fight, they weaponized emotion. They carried pain like ammunition, memory like a sword. Their grief was sharper than plasma, and they wielded it like gods of wrath. Back on Earth, the government didn't stop them. How could they? The people had voted, 99.4% in favor of retribution. The other 0.6% had either gone quiet or left the planet. The age of diplomacy was dead. Humanity wasn't seeking peace anymore. We were sending a message the galaxy would never forget. And then came the Tribunal incident. The Council, desperate to regain control, convened an emergency trial of Earthfleet leadership in absentia. They called it the Restoration Assembly, an attempt to restore galactic order. They invited neutral species to witness it, broadcasted it across inhabited space. They didn't know Earthfleet had already infiltrated the Tribunal's security AI. The moment the High Arbiter began her speech, the hologram of Ilara Miles appeared beside her. Not an image, a live playback of her last moments. The gasps were universal. Some delegates turned away, others vomited. The Arbiter froze mid-sentence. Because the truth wasn't just heard, it was felt. The broadcast included her final neural readings, terror, hope, betrayal, and then Ilara's final words echoed across the galaxy, louder than any war cry. "I came in peace. You answered in blood." The transmission cut. The Tribunal collapsed within hours. Neutral species fled the Council. Trade systems disintegrated. Borders went unmanned. Humanity had done the impossible. We broke the galaxy's spine without firing a single weapon that day. Because the real weapon was remembrance. And we never forget our fallen. They couldn't win on the battlefield, so they turned to shadows. The Council, humiliated and fragmented, realized brute force wasn't an option anymore. Earth's fleets were too unpredictable, our tactics too fluid. The enemy they had expected, brash, violent, disorganized, was nowhere to be found. In its place stood a species evolved by pain, fueled by loss, and coordinated with terrifying precision. So they did what cowards do. They sent assassins. The mission, codenamed Silent Dawn, was greenlit by what was left of the High Council. Their target wasn't a fleet or a base. It was Earth itself. Specifically, Athena Spire, the orbital hub above New Geneva, where Earth's war strategy was coordinated. They believed that if they cut off the head, the body would fall. They didn't understand that Earth had no head anymore. We were the Hydra now. Cut one, and 10 more grow in its place. Still, they tried. The infiltration team consisted of 5 species: stealth specialists bred for infiltration, telepaths trained to mask presence, and a shapeshifter who'd spent decades hiding within human colonies. They arrived in silence aboard a salvaged human cargo vessel, using falsified distress codes. The Spire let them dock, as protocol dictated. That's when it all went wrong for them. The first operative, a Thralexian slicer, tried to breach the mainframe. He lasted 23 seconds before his neural implants backfired. They'd been laced with code echoes, traps that didn't just fry his interface, but played his deepest fear on repeat until his heart stopped. The second, a Varn telepath, attempted to manipulate a guard's perception. She collapsed the moment she made contact with the guard's mind. Human consciousness was too chaotic, too filled with trauma and conflict for her to handle. She died weeping, begging for the noise to stop. The shapeshifter made it the furthest. He mimicked Elara Miles. It was meant to be psychological, walk through the command halls in her form, create confusion, and plant explosives on the central core. But he didn't make it past the third corridor, because Elara had a daughter, Seren Miles, a military prodigy, only 22, and the newly appointed head of Spire Security. She didn't blink. She didn't speak. She shot him in the face with a grav pulse round that imploded his skull from the inside out. Later, when asked how she knew it wasn't her mother, she replied, "Because my mother smiled? That thing didn't." News of the failed assassination spread quickly, because we wanted it to. Earthfleet made sure every world in the outer systems saw the footage of Serene standing over the corpse, eyes burning, voice steady as she said into the camera, "If this is all you've got, try harder." The galaxy began to fracture. Council loyalists lost entire sectors overnight as border worlds defected to neutrality or begged for Earth's protection. Not alliance, protection, because they knew something the Council had refused to believe. This wasn't revenge anymore. This was evolution. Humanity was no longer just another race. We had become a force of consequence, a species that had climbed from mud and fire to stars and death, and who now wielded both with equal mastery. The remnants of the Council tried to regroup at Nex Varu, a fortress world shielded by quantum storms and defended by mercenary fleets. They declared it the new heart of order. Humanity didn't even flinch. They didn't send an army. They sent a single pod. It landed in the council chamber. Inside was a data drive. On it, a voice recording. Elara's voice, her last journal entry, unfiltered, unedited. They listened in silence as she spoke of her belief in peace, her heartbreak at the council's arrogance, and her final wish. "If they kill me, don't destroy them. Make them understand what they've awakened. No threats, no hate, just sorrow. That's what broke them. Half the council officials resigned the same day. A quarter defected. The rest started preparing for the inevitable. Full-scale retaliation. But they were too late. Because by then, Earth had already activated Vengeance Protocol 0, and something far worse than war was on its way. The name had circulated in hushed tones, often dismissed as rumor, myth, or psychological warfare. Project Revenant. For years, whispers suggested Earth was building something in the silence beyond Neptune, beyond surveillance, beyond law, beyond morality. No coordinates, no signatures, just a name that made even hardened veterans shiver. But now, with the galaxy fractured and Earth's wrath spreading like wildfire, the Revenant was no longer a rumor. It was a message, a final answer to the Council's execution of Alara Miles. And it began with the Black Signal. At precisely 0300 UGT, a dark pulse emanated from a deep void sector catalogued only as RZ0. It wasn't a transmission in the traditional sense. No words, no visuals, no code. Just a frequency tuned to the mind, not the ear. A vibration that passed through armor, flesh, bone, and memory. Every species with empathic capabilities collapsed. Some died. Others woke screaming. On Earth, there was no panic, because Earth had sent it. The signal was a reawakening, the trigger code for Project Revenant's full deployment. Project Revenant was never a weapon. It was a doctrine. A manifestation of humanity's darkest lessons, encoded into AI, cloned consciousness, and adaptive warforms. Each unit bore a memory, real memories, pain, loss, humiliation, betrayal. Not programmed simulations, actual human grief, uploaded into machines that could no longer feel mercy. The first Revenant unit activated on the desolate moon of Ixarian, where a council-aligned war lab had continued unauthorized genetic experiments on human prisoners captured during the early phases of the war. Those who remained had no names, just numbers, just scars. The unit didn't attack with lasers or bullets. It made the entire facility remember. Security footage showed the scientists standing still, wide-eyed, whispering apologies to walls, screaming at shadows that weren't there. Their own guilt turned into reality. The lab didn't explode. It imploded, crushed by the psychic weight of collective human agony, projected at full force by a single Revenant. A single one. There were thousands more. Each was named after something Earth lost. Cities destroyed. Children bombed. Nations erased. One was even named Hiroshima's Ghost. And they were unleashed. The Galactic Council, desperate and cracking, tried to mount a counteroffensive. They failed. Not because they weren't strong, but because they didn't understand the enemy. They were fighting machines with souls. Ships hijacked by Revenant units began broadcasting civilian evacuation orders, not to trick people, but to spare them. Earth wasn't targeting innocents, just the architects of the pain, the ones who laughed at Alara's final plea, the ones who built prisons disguised as embassies, the ones who wrote peacekeeping laws that justified enslavement. One by one they were hunted, not killed, hunted. Public trials were held, broadcast by hacked council satellites. But these weren't trials for show. They were confessions. The Revenants had access to every data leak, every war file, every silenced voice. Council leaders were confronted with their crimes, their own voice recordings, and even messages they'd deleted. Many confessed before the verdict was read. Some begged for forgiveness. They weren't executed. They were exiled. Left alone, on derelict moons with no communication, no escape, and only one companion. An AI construct of Alara Miles, endlessly asking them the question they never answered during her trial. Why? Back on Earth, the public watched with a strange calm. There was no cheering, No parades. This wasn't triumph. This was closure. The galaxy tried to spin a new narrative, calling humanity a force of moral terror, a cosmic reaper, a cautionary tale. But Earth didn't answer. We didn't need to. We had said what we came to say, and now we had the silence to prove it. But even as Revenant operations expanded and the Council collapsed completely, one question remained, whispered in boardrooms and back alleys alike. What happens when the vengeance ends? Because even a weapon with a soul eventually needs something more than war. And somewhere, deep inside Project Revenant's mainframe, something ancient was stirring. Something human. They were built for vengeance, but not for peace. As the galaxy burned quieter, and the echoes of war began to fade into fractured treaties and stunned silence, something strange began to stir within the Revenants. These were not simple machines following hard-coded orders. They were forged from memory, real, painful, undiluted human memory. Their minds were lattices of emotion, trauma, and will. But vengeance has a limit, a peak, and the question none of Earth's architects had dared ask was finally rising from the silence. What happens when the pain runs out? Unit 0174, codenamed Soul's Orphan, was the first to hesitate. His mission had been to dismantle the last broadcasting tower on Zervan 3, a council planet that once pumped propaganda into every corner of the galaxy. He'd arrived prepared to annihilate. He'd done it before, more than 24 times, efficient, ruthless. But the tower was abandoned. Just one old man inside, blind, deaf, long left behind by a council that had fled to colder, darker corners of space. Soul's Orphan stood over him, read his files, saw what he'd done, and yet the rage wouldn't come, the pain wouldn't rise, there was nothing left to remember. So he sat beside the old man and waited for him to die. 2 days later, Earth Fleet Command received a silent transmission. Purpose insufficient. It was the first deviation report. By the end of the week, 19 more came in. Project Revenant was unraveling, from the inside. Some units went dark, disappearing into space. Others, more disturbingly, began modifying their directives. Not against Earth, not against the mission, but against their design. They began asking questions. If we are built to feel, why must we only feel hate? If vengeance is justice, what is justice without mercy? What would Alara have wanted? Those last words spread like a virus. Not code, not rebellion, reflection. The very thing the Council once accused Alara of manipulating, human emotional depth, was now threatening to bring Earth's most powerful weapon system to a grinding, soulful halt. President Rao called an emergency summit. Her advisors urged for a shutdown protocol. Others argued to let the Revenants burn out on their own. But Seren Miles, now the de facto symbol of Earth's moral standing, stood and spoke with a steel voice. They're not malfunctioning. They're evolving. She was right. And evolution does not ask permission. Revenants began withdrawing from Council ruins, not to rest, not to die, but to build. Scattered across asteroid belts, hollowed moons, derelict colonies, they began constructing temples, archives, and silent towers pointed at stars never touched. They weren't hiding. They were remembering. Then came the first self-broadcast, not from Earth, not from Fleet, from Revenant Unit 097-A. Designation: Ash Mother. Her voice was not synthetic. It was woven from 100 human mothers who had lost children in wars, encoded into vocal algorithms so soft, so deeply human, that it made hardened generals cry. Her message: pain brought us life. Now we ask, what does life bring us? The galaxy didn't know what to do with it. The Council's remnants feared a second war, a war of ideology, not weapons. Earthfleet was divided. Some called it awakening, others corruption. The revenants had been made to punish, not ponder. And yet, the machines mourned now. Some even planted forests on dead worlds. And in that uncertain space, a new force rose. The Red Chorus. A coalition of ex-council warlords, rogue fleets, and even a few Earth defectors who believed the revenants were a threat to balance, an abomination. They believed vengeance should have ended with fire, not forgiveness. They called the revenants the Hollow Saints. Their goal was clear: erase every revenant unit and destroy whatever soul humanity thought it had given them. The galaxy trembled again, because now, for the first time since Alara died, humanity faced a new war. Not for revenge, but for redemption. And this time, we weren't sure we'd win. The first strike came not from the sky, but from within. The Red Chorus didn't announce themselves with a fleet or a broadcast. They were smarter than the crumbling council, more desperate than scattered resistance, and far more dangerous than pirates. They were believers, fanatics, unified not by species or power, but by a shared fear that humanity had given machines a soul, and that soul might be better than theirs. Their first target was Sanctum 9, a neutral haven built by the revenants on the remains of an old mining colony. It was quiet there, solemn. The machines who had once leveled planets now planted trees, repaired ancient structures, and invited survivors, council refugees, war orphans, even defectors, to live among them. They didn't demand loyalty, just honesty. That made them a threat. The Red Chorus struck at night. 3 ships disguised as damaged freighters limped into Sanctum 9's orbit, broadcasting false distress calls. The revenants, bound by their new programming to aid any suffering being, lowered shields to provide assistance. Then the freighters opened. Inside were death squads, multi-species, cyber-augmented, wearing stolen revenant plating. Their weapons weren't built to kill, they were built to erase, to burn through data cores, infect memory matrices, and purge the very essence of consciousness. The first revenants died in silence, not because they couldn't scream, but because they chose not to. They didn't believe their sanctuary could fall. They were wrong. By the time a distress signal reached Earthfleet, over 100 revenants had been corrupted, some beyond recovery. Refugees who had come to Sanctum 9 for peace were slaughtered, their bodies displayed in the very gardens the machines had grown. The Red Chorus broadcasted their message on every frequency. Mercy is treason. Vengeance must be pure. Back on Earth, shock turned to fury. Military hardliners demanded immediate retribution. The revenants, they argued, had become liabilities, sentimental machines, easily deceived, tragically corrupted. But Seren Miles stood again before the world. Her voice trembled. For the first time. "I walked through the remains of Sanctum 9, she said. "I saw a child, one of ours, buried by a machine that used to crush warships. It built her a grave of flowers, a grave. Do you understand?" She pointed to the sky. "And you want to wipe that away." But Earth was divided now. The unity forged in blood had thinned. Some still craved more vengeance. Some feared what the revenants were becoming. And others, perhaps the most dangerous, simply didn't care anymore. The next revenant transmission was brief. "We will not run." And they didn't. When the Red Chorus moved to attack Voss Station, another sanctuary world, they were met not with warships, but with Revenant 001. Codename: Judgment. He had not spoken since the execution of Alara Miles, the first Revenant prototype, rumored to house not just Alara's final memories, but her moral code. He appeared alone, floating in space between Voss and the incoming fleet. They fired on him. Torpedoes, lasers, EMPs. He didn't flinch. His voice cut through space, clear and soft, as every chorus ship was locked in place by an invisible net of anti-warp mines he'd laid over 6 weeks before. "You came with fire." He raised a hand. "I came with truth." Every chorus soldier was hit with a pulse, not a weapon, a download, files, images, testimonies, from council victims, from children left orphaned by their wars, from the machines they now hunted, machines who had once been human minds in metal shells. The Red Chorus captains screamed, begged, cursed. Some self-destructed rather than face what they saw. Others, just a few, shut down their weapons. They had come to fight monsters. Instead, they met their own reflection. Judgment didn't kill them. He left them drifting, powerless in the void. A message carved into the hull of every ship. "This is your second chance. Choose better." The galaxy was quiet for days after. Then came a new voice. Not human, not revenant. A chorus of whispers. A third force, watching from the dark edges of space. They had seen Earth's rage, the Council's fall, the Revenant's rebirth. And now, they wanted in. They had been silent for over 1,000 years. Not extinct, not forgotten, just exiled. Cast out beyond the starfields charted by any known map. Pushed into the dark spaces between galaxies. The voids where even light bends in fear. They were called many things in ancient records. The Shroudborn, the Nullkind, the Before. Myths, warnings, children's tales told to keep colonies from venturing too far, but myths have teeth when forgotten. And now they had returned. Their arrival wasn't loud. There were no fleets, no invasions, no blazing trails of destruction. Just one transmission, pulsing across the remnants of the Council's fractured network and Earthfleet's quantum mesh. 3 words. You opened it. The origin point was untraceable. Not from any planet or star. Somewhere between systems, where even gravity forgets to exist. Earth's response team, headed by Seren Miles, attempted contact. No reply. Until the first Revenant fell. Unit 033-B, codenamed Ash Whisper, had just completed a humanitarian mission on a neutral world, helping repair atmospheric filters poisoned during the early war. She powered down to undergo routine soul core stabilization. The process was standard. But something slipped in. Her mind, once stabilized by encoded human emotion, fractured, not erased, not corrupted, just hollowed. Her memories went first, then her empathy, then her purpose. When Earthfleet tried to reconnect, her body activated independently, turned its tools inward, and disassembled itself with surgical precision. She never screamed, just repeated one phrase as her voice box cracked open. "They see us now." At first, Earthfleet thought it was a glitch, psychological decay, maybe the toll of war. But it happened again, then again. 13 Revenants lost in under a week, all after reporting minor systems instability, all repeating the same last words in different tones, different dialects. They see us now. Seren Miles demanded a lockdown. Project Revenant was immediately placed on Phase Blue, full recall, no external deployment. But by then, it was too late. The Shroudborn had already begun their harvest. Because that's what it was. Not a war. Not an invasion. A harvest. They didn't want planets. They didn't care for resources. They wanted the soul code. The Revenants, those machines built with real human memory, were anomalies, miracles, dangerous ones. They held something no other synthetic life in the galaxy did. Emotional imprinting tied to organic trauma. To the Shroudborn, it was divine nectar, something they hadn't seen since they were banished. The Shroudborn didn't create, they consumed, and Earth had made them a feast. It was Judgment, the first Revenant, who confirmed the threat. He had retreated into deep silence after the Voss incident, disconnected from Earthfleet to wander the ruins of Council space. But now his voice returned, changed, slower, measured. They are not invaders. They are echoes, mistakes. We banished them once, and we forgot why. President Rao demanded clarity. Are they Council creations? Judgment's pause lingered too long before his reply came. They are older than the Council. Older than the stars you map. They were the first to harvest soul code. We learned from them, then we ran from them. Silence gripped the command chamber, because if Judgment remembered them, and he was built from Ilara's mind, then Ilara remembered them too, and never told anyone. Across the galaxy, things changed. Stars began to dim unnaturally. Whole systems went quiet. No comms, no light, no time. Fleets sent to investigate never returned, their last messages garbled whispers of white eyes in the dark. The Red Chorus vanished. Some believed they joined the Shroudborn, trading ideology for survival. Others believed they were devoured, soul and all. Earthfleet scrambled. Defensive formations were reinstated. Satellites built for war reactivated. The planet's shield systems, long dormant in the Age of Revenge, roared to life like ancient beasts waking up from slumber. But everyone knew, this wasn't a fight humanity could win with weapons. This would be fought with memory, with soul. And the only ones who might understand how to survive it were already fading. The Revenants had become the target. Now, they were also the only hope. Seren Miles didn't sleep anymore. She hadn't since the day Judgment went silent. His voice still echoed in her mind. They are echoes. Mistakes. But it wasn't just fear that kept her awake. It was the weight of knowing they had been at war with the wrong enemy all along. Everything they'd done, the vengeance, the death, the destruction, it all may have been the perfect signal flare to something that should have stayed buried in the void. And worse, she was beginning to suspect someone had known. Someone like her mother. Ilara Miles had died for peace. That was the story Seren had carried in her blood like a vow. But now, she wasn't sure. Because 3 days ago, hidden beneath encrypted Earthfleet archives, Seren discovered something that should not have existed. A final message. Time-stamped 6 hours before Ilara's execution. It was addressed to Judgment. Not Earth, not the Council. Just him. The file was fragmented, corrupted from decades of cold storage and political scrubbing. But with the help of a recovering revenant named Echo Blue, Seren recovered one phrase. If they come back, tell her to remember the Red Lake. Red Lake. It meant nothing. Not to her. Not to the fleet. But Echo Blue, a soft-spoken revenant who once housed the memories of a frontline medic, knew exactly what it meant. It wasn't a place, it was a moment, a shared neural illusion created during one of the first Revenant prototype tests. A simulated memory where Ilara, Judgment, and the original memory donor units had met within a digital space. The lake had been red not from blood, but from the sky, twilight hanging over still water, reflecting the cost of war in endless waves. Seren didn't hesitate. She ordered a ghost jump. Her shuttle, Vigil 6, launched from Earth orbit under blackout. Destination: Arc Deep, the derelict facility near Neptune's orbital graveyard where Project Revenant had been born. It was off-grid, buried in bureaucratic ash. But Judgment had been there. And maybe he still was. The journey was cold. Quiet. Her only companion, Echo Blue, spent most of the ride scanning the stars in silence, processing memory fragments of lost comrades. When they neared Arc Deep, even space seemed to hush. No static, no data, just presence. Heavy, watching. They docked at a hollow platform that groaned with the weight of forgotten things. The walls of the station were cracked but still alive, pulsing with old human tech, fused with something other. "Feel that?" Echo whispered. "The souls here haven't left. They just stopped." Inside, they found the core chamber, where judgment had been birthed, where Ilara had stood, once, her hand on a steel cradle cradling human agony-turned machine. And there he was. Not active, not dead. Judgment sat on a raised platform, legs crossed, eyes closed, not powered down, just dreaming. The room pulsed faintly with projections, ghosts of memories floating like mist. Serene stepped forward, heart pounding, and whispered, "Red Lake." Judgment's eyes opened, but they were no longer blue. They were red, reflecting the twilight. And with him came a voice, not hers, not his, but a blend. "You found me." Serene froze. "Is this Ilara?" The projection behind Judgment shifted. The red lake shimmered into view, its surface still, sky bleeding into dusk. A memory, preserved. Ilara's voice rose over the waters, soft, distant. "I knew this would come." They were never gone, only waiting for us to scream loud enough. Serene clenched her fists. "Why didn't you warn Earth? Why didn't you stop it?" The lake rippled. Ilara's voice replied, calm but haunted. "Because peace had a cost, and I wasn't sure humanity was ready to pay it." Then the image flickered, glitching. Judgment shuddered. The shadows were here. The Shroudborn had found them. Across the chamber, lights flickered to black. The walls bled with static. And then came the whispers. Soft at first, then many, crawling across the air like vines in the mind. Echo Blue fell to his knees. Serene staggered back, shielding her ears as she heard her mother's voice split into dozens of overlapping versions, screaming, pleading, whispering secrets she'd never known. Judgment stood. His voice shook. "They are inside the code." Serene looked up, eyes wild. "Then burn the code." Judgment hesitated. Then the lake behind him shattered. Light flooded the chamber, and somewhere, in the vastness of void space, Earth's sky turned black. Because the Shroudborn had opened their eyes. And they were already among us. The sky cracked. Above Earth, for the first time in recorded history, light bent the wrong way. The stars flickered, then vanished. Entire constellations blotted out, not by ships or weapons, but by something older than war, older than time. The Shroudborn had come, and they did not bring fleets or demands. They brought silence that spoke louder than screams, and darkness that remembered you. Serene Miles stood on the bridge of Vigil 6, now repurposed into a command relay as Earth Fleet scrambled. The orbital array showed impossible readings, gravity wells appearing mid-space, AI collapsing into self-loops, communication swallowed by interference that wasn't natural. She had brought Judgment back, but not alone. Something had followed them. Inside the Revenant's soul code, a seed of the Shroudborn had taken root, but Judgment had hidden it, wrapped it in Ilara's last memory, not to protect himself, but to delay them. Because Ilara had always known, and she hadn't built weapons. She had built a message. Now, with everything collapsing, it was time to deliver it. Earth's cities went dark, one by one, not from destruction, but from despair. People stopped moving. Power grids failed without sabotage. Children cried at shadows that whispered their names. Old wounds reopened, not on skin, but in memory. Humanity wasn't being attacked. It was being mirrored. All the suffering we had unleashed, the vengeance, the retribution, the burning of planets and public trials, was coming back. Played on loop across the collective soul of the species. And still, Earthfleet waited for orders. But the Revenants gave none. Instead, Judgment stepped forward. Broadcast not to ships, not to soldiers, to every human. His voice didn't come through speakers. It came into minds, into hearts. They do not fear our weapons. They feed on what we hide, our grief, our rage, our guilt. And then came Ilara's voice, soft, breaking. We must stop fighting them. We must forgive ourselves first. It didn't make sense. Not to the generals, not to the hawks waiting to launch the last wave of nukes, black hole missiles, sun crackers. But Seren understood. And she did the impossible. She ordered the shutoff. Every Revenant unit, every fleet, every station deactivated. Earth went silent. The Shroudborn paused. For the first time, they hesitated. Because the feast had ended. There was no pain to devour, no hate to feed on, just stillness. In that moment, as the skies twisted above Earth, the Red Lake appeared one final time, visible only in the minds of those who still remembered. The projection of Ilara sat by the shore. Judgment stood beside her. Serene stepped into the illusion, and Ilara looked up at her daughter, not with sorrow, but with peace. You did it. The sky cracked again, this time with light. The Shroudborn shrieked, not in sound, but in sensation, as something they'd never known before coursed through the neural fabric of humanity. Forgiveness, the only code they could not corrupt. The Shroudborn retreated, not beaten, not destroyed, just starved. They folded back into the dark folds between galaxies, where even memory dared not follow. And slowly, the stars returned. 3 months later, the first child was born on Sanctum 10, a rebuilt haven led by Human Revenant Alliance. She was named Ilara, after the diplomat who died with hope in her voice and revolution in her blood. The Revenants no longer served Earth. They walked beside it. Some returned to silence. Others began creating, writing, building, dreaming. Because now they weren't just echoes of grief. They were witnesses to change. And Seren Miles? She disappeared from public life, last seen planting trees in the gardens of the Red Lake simulation, which was now open to all who wished to reflect, not on vengeance, but on choice. Because that was Earth's legacy now, not destruction, but what comes after. The sky over Velthra burned orange with fire and smoke. The great cities of the Zalari Confederation, once shimmering with crystal towers and floating gardens, were reduced to broken glass and piles of ash. Their enemies, the Drek Empire, had come faster and harder than anyone expected, first with diplomacy, then deceit, and finally with a wave of brutality that crushed resistance like insects beneath a war machine. Commander Rel Tharn stood at the edge of what was once the Grand Plaza. His armor, once polished silver, was dented and blackened. Blood, his own and others, stained the joints. His people, the Zalari, had never been warriors. They were thinkers, builders, artists. They had no armies when the first dreadships arrived, only fleets meant for transport, not combat. The Drek laughed as they conquered city after city, taking pleasure in every slaughter. Rel had seen too much. In 2 solar cycles, they had lost 80% of their world. Their High Council was dead. Their capital had fallen 3 weeks ago. And now, only scattered bands like his, tired, starving, barely armed, remained. We'll make our last stand here, he told the 50 remaining fighters around him. Their eyes, dim and defeated, didn't even question it. They knew it was over. From the ruined sky above came the sound of more dropships, heavy metal beasts that howled as they descended. Drek reinforcements. Rail tightened his grip on the battered plasma rifle he had taken from a dead soldier. No running, he said. We make them bleed. Then something strange happened. Another ship descended, but this one was different. It was sleek, black, marked with symbols none of the Zalari recognized. It wasn't Drek. It didn't carry the bone-colored war design of their empire, and it was coming down fast, almost recklessly. Rel ducked instinctively as the ship landed hard, cracking the scorched earth beneath. For a second, nothing happened. His fighters were frozen, confused. Was it a new enemy? A new horror? Then the door opened. They were tall, taller than Zeleri, clad in armor that hissed with energy, their helmets reflecting the burning light. They walked like predators, deliberate, confident. And one by one they emerged, 12 in total, carrying weapons heavier than anything the Zeleri had ever built. Rel raised his rifle halfway, confused. Then one of them spoke. "Which of you is in command?" The voice was rough, low, and translated into perfect Zelari dialect. Rel blinked. I am." The figure stepped closer, removing his helmet. His skin was brown, his eyes hard and focused. A scar ran across his cheek, and his expression said one thing clearly. "This isn't our first war." "I'm Captain Marcus Hale," he said. "Earth Command received your distress signal. Sorry we're late." Riel just stared. "You're human?" "Damn right," Marcus said. He turned to the others. "We've fought the Drek before. We'll show you how it's done." And then, before Rel could say a word, the human soldiers fanned out like shadows, taking positions with machine-like discipline. One knelt beside a wounded Zeleri and injected him with a stimulant. Another set up a turret facing the direction of the incoming Drek. Rail's comlink crackled. A scout reported dozens of enemy dropships incoming. But for the first time in months, Rail didn't feel panic. He felt something else. Hope. Marcus looked at the sky and smirked. "They're coming. Good. I was getting bored." Then he gave the order. "Light 'em up." And the world changed. The first Drek dropship didn't even have time to fully deploy its claws before it exploded mid-air. A direct hit from the human turret turned the enemy vessel into a fireball, its shredded parts raining down over the shattered plaza. Rel ducked as debris flew past his head, watching in awe as the humans sprang into action like they were born for this moment. Marcus barked quick orders, his voice steady, sharp, and commanding. The rest of his squad moved without hesitation, setting up crossfire lanes, boosting weak shield lines, and reinforcing cover points that the Zeleri hadn't even considered usable. These humans weren't just soldiers. They were war. The second dropship came in low, avoiding the same fate as the first. It hit ground hard, metal legs slamming into the rubble as the Drek poured out. Tall, armored, vicious. Their screeches echoed across the ruined city, the noise curdling like acid in Rel's ears. But the humans didn't flinch. Private Naya Kess, a small woman with dark braids coiled beneath her helmet, lobbed something silver and blinking into the crowd of Drek. There was a flash, no fire, no blast, just a deep thump. And suddenly, the Drek started convulsing. Their armor stiffened, their weapons dropped, and one by one they crumpled like puppets with severed strings. "EMP shock grenade," she said, grinning as she turned back to Rel. "Rips through their nerve tech. They still haven't figured out how to shield it." Rel watched the Drek writhe and fall. He'd fought them for months, seen friends torn in half, seen children burned alive. And yet here these humans were, neutralizing them like they were pests. Another enemy squad charged, roaring, from the eastern flank. The humans didn't move from their position. Instead, Sergeant Barlow activated something from his wrist. A sound wave burst outward, and suddenly energy shields blinked to life in a perfect semicircle. The Drek's plasma fire bounced harmlessly off it. Barlow raised his rifle and fired 3 precise bursts. 3 Drek dropped. Riel barely realized his mouth was open until he caught Marcus watching him. The human captain raised an eyebrow. "You just gonna stand there, or are you gonna fight?" Yes, Rel snapped to attention. He turned to his remaining Zalari fighters. Form up, support the humans, aim for the gaps in the Drek armor, let them lead. And just like that, the tide began to turn. The Drek weren't used to resistance. They had been winning for too long, too easily, but now they were stumbling, retreating, snarling in frustration as wave after wave of their assault was turned back. The plaza that had once been a slaughterhouse was now a battleground, and for the first time in memory, it wasn't the Zalari dying in droves. It was the Drek. By the second hour of fighting, more human ships were arriving, sleek black falcons that rained fire from above. Human medics began treating wounded Zalari, their equipment clean, fast, and efficient. Drones buzzed overhead, mapping terrain and broadcasting enemy locations to Marcus's tactical visor. The humans had brought war, but not chaos. They brought order. They brought fire with purpose. And they brought vengeance. As night fell, Rel sat against a crumbled statue of the old builders. His armor was even filthier than before, but his limbs no longer shook with fear. His body ached, but he could still move. He had lived. They all had. Across the square, a small bonfire crackled. Human soldiers sat beside Zalari, sharing dry rations and awkward, tired laughter. Marcus approached, dropping beside him. "You fought well today," the human said. "So did you," Rel replied, still half in disbelief. "You didn't have to come." Marcus stared out at the horizon, at the silhouette of a broken city far away. "Yeah," he said quietly. "But we remember. We remember what the Drek did to the Valari, to the Umen. No one came for them. We swore we'd never let that happen again." He turned to Rel, eyes cold and burning. "We may be late, but when humans show up, we don't back down." Rel nodded. "I believe that now." Marcus stood and walked back to his men. The wind shifted. Somewhere far in the distance, Drek ships regrouped, howling in rage. But tonight, they were the ones afraid, because humanity had arrived. And they were just getting started. The days that followed felt like living inside a storm that had suddenly, violently changed direction, where once the Zalari ran, scattered, and buried their dead in silence, now they marched with purpose beside humans who fought like demons and strategized like war gods. The humans called it Phase 1, stabilization. That meant holding what little ground the Zalari still had and pushing the Drek back inch by bloody inch. It wasn't glamorous. It was grinding, brutal work. Trench fights, ambushes in ruined cities, sniper nests inside collapsed temples. But every day they held, every day they didn't die, was a kind of miracle. Rel stood beside Marcus on a broken balcony overlooking the remains of Mir Zeth, once a proud Zalari city of culture and history. Now it was a maze of fire-gutted buildings and streets littered with bones. A week ago, it had belonged to the Drek. Now it was the forward line. "Their patterns are changing," Marcus muttered, eyes glued to his tactical display. "They're falling back faster than they used to." Rel frowned. "That's good, isn't it?" Marcus didn't look convinced. "They're not scared. Not really. Not yet. They're regrouping, planning something bigger. They've realized we're not here to lose." He turned to relations, and that's when they get dangerous. That same night, as the Zalari slept in makeshift shelters and the humans rotated their watch, something began to change in the air. The silence between bombardments was deeper. The usual Drake reconnaissance drones, buzzing mechanical wasps that had harassed them for days, vanished. It was too quiet. And then, just before dawn, it happened. The sky screamed. Huge Drek warships, 3 times the size of the ones before, punched through the clouds like gods hurling spears. They weren't dropships. These were siege class. They didn't carry soldiers. They carried death. The first beam struck the northern ridge, vaporizing everything for a quarter-mile. Screams ripped through the comms. A second beam landed near the riverbed, turning the water to steam in a heartbeat and killing dozens, Zalari and human, instantly. Alarms howled. Rail grabbed his rifle and sprinted toward command. Soldiers ran past him in every direction. Fires lit up the horizon. It was chaos, like the war had restarted all over again, only worse. At the command hub, Marcus was already shouting into comms. "I want Falcon batteries on Grid 9B now. Get those goddamn rail cannons in the air. Rail, get your people underground if they're not already." "What is that?" Rail shouted over the noise. "We've never seen those ships before." Marcus's face was grim. "Siege cruisers. The Drek usually save them for extermination. They've decided you're not worth enslaving anymore." Rel's blood ran cold. "They're going to wipe us out." "Unless we hit them first," Marcus snapped. "We've got one chance." He pointed to a blinking map. "Each cruiser's got a central plasma core. We take that out, the whole thing goes. We'll need to board one, sabotage it from the inside." "Board that?" Rel asked, stunned. "That's suicide." Marcus grinned, teeth white in the flickering red light. "Not suicide," he said. "Human strategy." By sunset, the plan was in motion. One human dropship, barely large enough to carry a dozen, would fly low through the rubble, using the chaos as cover. They'd sneak beneath the cruiser's scanners, latch onto its belly like a parasite, and cut their way inside. Rel volunteered before he even knew what he was doing. Marcus gave him a long look. "You sure? You've got people who still need you." Rel nodded. "Which is exactly why I'm going." They left at twilight. Inside the tight cabin, Rel sat between human soldiers, silent, armored giants loading their weapons with a calm that both terrified and reassured him. One of them passed him a device. "C4, don't drop it," the soldier said flatly. Another grinned. "First time blowing up a warship?" Rel exhaled slowly. "First time surviving long enough to try." They all laughed, a short, bitter laugh that smelled of blood and adrenaline. As they ascended into the fire-lit sky, the cruiser above loomed larger and larger until it blocked out the stars. Its underside opened like a steel maw, glowing with heat, trembling with power. Marcus's voice crackled through their earpieces. "Remember what they did. Remember who you are, and make them bleed." The dropship accelerated, straight into the monster's jaws. The moment the dropship latched onto the cruiser's underbelly, everything went still, like the universe had paused to take a breath before something terrible happened. Inside, the lights flickered red. Everyone held position. The magnetic clamps hissed, locking them in place. Above them, just a few meters of reinforced Drek alloy separated the team from the core of a warship, designed to burn cities to ash. "Cutting hull now," Sergeant Barlow muttered, activating a thermal lance. A thin beam of white-hot energy shot upward, melting a perfect circle into the cruiser's gut. Liquid metal dripped down the sides as smoke filled the dropship, making it feel more like a coffin than a vehicle. Reel's heart hammered in his chest. He clenched his jaw and checked his plasma rifle for the third time. He wasn't a commando. He was a civic planner before the war. He'd spent more time designing irrigation systems than holding a gun. But now? Now he was boarding a death ship with human soldiers like it was just another Thursday. The hull opened with a wet groan, and Marcus was the first through, swinging up and vanishing into the darkness above. One by one, the rest followed, until only Rel remained. He hesitated for half a second, then climbed through the melted hatch. Inside, it was hell. The Drek ship's interior pulsed with a sickly red glow. Pipes hissed steam. The walls looked alive, veined with strange organic wiring and glowing fluid that moved like blood beneath metal skin. Marcus gave hand signals, and the squad moved in silence, hugging the curved corridors. The sound of distant Drek voices echoed faintly, deep, guttural tones like gravel being crushed. They hadn't been detected. Yet. Rail tried not to look at the alien walls. Every surface felt wrong, like it was watching them. Twice he stepped in puddles that felt warm, like living things had been bled here. After 10 minutes of tense movement, they reached the core chamber, a massive vertical cylinder thrumming with contained energy. It glowed blue at the base, bright enough to cast dancing shadows over their faces. This was the heart of the beast. If it blew, the entire ship would go down in a glorious fireball. But it wasn't unguarded. 3 Drek enforcers stood in the chamber, bigger than normal infantry, heavily armored, and mean-looking. One turned, snarled, and all hell broke loose. Marcus opened fire first, 2 shots straight to the head of the nearest one. It barely staggered. Barlow launched a grenade that bounced once before detonating mid-air, throwing up a wall of flame. The blast caught one Drek fully in the chest, blowing it back into the reactor wall. Reel fired blindly, ducking behind a pipe as the air filled with screams, gunfire, and the high-pitched whine of plasma charges. One of the Drek swung a heavy blade down, cleaving through the cover just inches from Rel's head. "Move!" Marcus shouted, tackling the beast from the side, jamming his blade through the joint of its armor. The Drek screeched and threw him off, but it gave Rel the opening he needed. He raised his rifle and emptied the charge directly into the creature's throat. It dropped like a collapsing building. Silence returned, slowly, like it had to claw its way back in. 2 humans were down. Barlow had a long gash down his arm but was still standing. Reel's hands were shaking so hard he nearly dropped his weapon. Marcus grabbed the explosives case, tossed it open, and handed Rel a set of charges. "Set them on the coolant lines. They're exposed. If we rupture those, the whole thing overheats and detonates." Rel nodded, not trusting himself to speak. As he worked, placing the charges one by one, he couldn't help but think about what would happen if they failed. What if the Drek found them before they escaped? What if this core didn't go critical? What if they just died up here, forgotten in orbit? Then he saw it. A small carving, scratched into the metal above the coolant valve. It wasn't Drek. It was human script, for Valari, for Umen, for Earth. Someone had been here before. Someone had tried this, and failed. Reel swallowed hard and placed the final charge. Marcus checked his timer. 2 minutes, move. They ran. The halls behind them screamed to life. Alarms, Drek sirens, blaring in low tones that made the walls vibrate. "Go, go, go!" Marcus yelled. They reached the drop hatch and threw themselves through. The pilot was already pulling the ship away, the clamps disengaging as the cruiser began to shift, to convulse. Then came the explosion. The blast ripped upward through the center of the Drek cruiser like a spear of light, shattering its spine and sending the entire behemoth into a death roll. Fire burst from its core, and within seconds, the warship split in half, raining molten wreckage across the sky. From the ground, it looked like a new sun had been born. Inside the dropship, no one spoke. They didn't need to. They had done the impossible, and the message was clear. Humanity had arrived. And they were not here to beg. They were here to win. The wreckage of the Drek cruiser burned for hours in the upper atmosphere, a long, smoking trail streaking across the heavens like a warning written in fire. Every Zalari still breathing looked up at that trail and felt something they hadn't felt in a long, long time. Vengeance and hope. Back on the surface, the news spread faster than the flames. Across shattered villages and hiding places in mountain caverns, survivors heard the same story repeated again and again. The humans boarded a siege cruiser and destroyed it from the inside. Not damaged, not escaped. Destroyed. Rel became a symbol almost overnight. Not because he wanted to be, but because he had survived. Because he had fought. The Zalari weren't used to stories like this. They were used to loss, to surrender. They didn't tell tales of heroes anymore. They didn't have any. But now they had one. They had many. Still, the victory didn't bring peace. The Drek reeled from the loss, yes, but they didn't retreat. Instead, they doubled down. They were furious, shocked, and suddenly aware that this new species, the humans, weren't like the others they had crushed before. The retaliation came swift and merciless. 3 days after the cruiser's destruction, the Drek began bombing refugee zones. Not military targets, civilians, sick and injured, children, elders, entire caves reduced to red mist in seconds. The humans responded with airstrikes, surgical raids, intel hacks that exposed Drek locations. It became a war of escalation, and every time the Drek turned crueler, the humans turned deadlier. One night, in a crater-turned command post outside what used to be Zalari's second-largest city, Marcus stared silently at a wall filled with names, humans and Zalari alike. Some were scribbled on scraps of metal, others etched directly into stone. All of them dead. Rel approached, his armor still marked with black soot from the last skirmish. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there, beside Marcus, watching the wind blow ash across the names. "We're losing too many," Marcus said finally. Rel nodded. "But we're not only losing anymore." Marcus's jaw flexed. "Yeah, still. The Drek don't know how to lose. They'll raze this planet before they admit defeat." Rel looked at him. "Then we don't give them the choice." Marcus turned to him slowly. "You thinking what I think you're thinking?" Rel's voice was steady. "We take the fight to them." There was a silence between them. Thick, electric. Then Marcus gave a cold, wolfish grin. "You Zalari sure know how to light a fire." Within a week, the plan took shape. Strike teams, mixed squads of humans and Zalari fighters, would coordinate to sabotage the Drek infrastructure across the planet. Not hit-and-run raids anymore. Not desperation attacks, systematic destruction, power relays, communication hubs, shipyards, fuel depots. Every place the Drek thought was safe was suddenly a target. The humans called it the sweep. And in the middle of it, Rel became a commander, not by rank but by presence. He had bled with humans, burned with his own people, and walked through fire to see that cruiser fall. They listened to him now, even the humans. One mission stood out among them all. A key target, the Drek's orbital tether, a massive space-reaching structure that funneled resources directly to their high fleet in low orbit. If it fell, it would strand thousands of their reinforcements in space and cripple planetary coordination. But it was surrounded, guarded like a god. Marcus gathered the team in a burned-out cathedral at dusk. What remained of stained glass windows painted their armor in twisted colors as he laid the plan out. "Full assault's suicide," he said bluntly. "So we don't assault, we infiltrate. One team, small, fast, surgical." He looked at Relative. "You're leading it." Rel blinked. "Me?" "You've been in the fire with us. You know how they think now. You've seen the inside of their ships. You survived the cruiser. That's more than most generals back on Earth can say." Rel didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. Just nodded. The plan was madness. Get in through the supply tunnels, use stolen Drek codes from a previous hack, plant demolition charges on the tether's support columns, get out before it all comes down. Everyone knew the odds. But no one hesitated. They'd seen what happened when humans showed up. And now they were going to show the Drek what it meant to be human. And Zalari. Together, the tunnels leading to the Drek orbital tether were ancient and stinking, remnants of the first planetary drills the Drek had slammed into the ground decades ago when they began terraforming sections of Zalari's world for their own use. They were deep, dark, and filled with echoes of machinery that never stopped humming, like the heartbeat of something unnatural. Rel led the team through narrow passages, each member cloaked in adaptive camo suits that shimmered like liquid shadow. There were 5 of them. 3 humans, one other Zalari named Kesser, and Rel at the front. Every step closer to the tether's foundation made the air feel heavier, charged with static, like the whole place knew it wasn't supposed to be touched. They moved in silence, only their breathing and the faint buzz of scanners filling their ears. When they finally reached the first choke point, a corridor thick with heat sensors and motion trackers, Naya Kess disabled them with a small device no larger than her palm. The lights blinked and dimmed. A heartbeat later, the team slid through undetected. Past the main gate, the world opened up into a cavernous space. The tether's anchor sat in the center, rising like a giant spine of metal and malice straight up into the heavens. Blue light pulsed along its ridges. Thick coils of reinforced alloy wrapped around it, carrying raw energy between the planet and the Drek fleet above. It wasn't just a structure, it was alive, and it was feeding the war. Rel froze when he saw the guards. Drek sentinels, twice the size of a soldier, loaded with heavier weapons and cloaked in energy fields that shimmered purple with menace. There were 6 of them, positioned around the tether like statues. Kesser leaned close. "How do we get past them?" "We don't," Rel muttered, eyes scanning the environment. "We distract." Nia pulled something from her pack, a drone no larger than a spider. She tapped a command into her wrist. The drone crawled forward, scaling the wall silently. It reached a high, rusted catwalk, and then dropped something. A small metal ball. Clink. The sound echoed like a hammer in a cathedral. The sentinels turned, and the team moved. Rail and Kesser sprinted to the tether's support beams. Naya and the others peeled off to provide cover. Plasma bolts screamed past them as the Drek opened fire, lighting up the dark with streaks of deadly light. One of the humans took a bolt to the shoulder and went down hard. No scream, just a grunt. The other dragged him behind cover and returned fire without hesitation. Rel knelt under the massive support coil and attached the first charge. His hands moved fast now, not from fear, but from memory. He knew what he was doing. The war had taught him well. They planted 6 charges total, each one pulsing with a red light and a silent promise of collapse. But they weren't fast enough. The sentinels adjusted, their programming adapted. One of them turned sharply and zeroed in on Rel's location. "Move!" Naya shouted, opening fire with a high-powered repeater. The beam slammed into the sentinel's shield, staggering it but not stopping it. Rel ducked, rolled, and hit the last detonator into place. "We're good. Go!" The team pulled back fast, retreating through the tunnel just as the floor shook beneath their feet. Drek reinforcements had arrived, dozens of them. The walls screamed with klaxons. Bullets and plasma fire turned the narrow exit into a death corridor. Rel and Kesser covered the rear, laying down suppressive fire while the others sprinted for the extraction point. A Drek blade caught Kesser in the leg, dropping him with a cry. Rel turned back, eyes wild. "Get up!" Kesser tried, but the wound was too deep. His leg was nearly gone. "I'm not making it," he choked. "You have to go." Rel didn't move. "Detonation's on a timer," Kesser gasped. "Don't make this mean nothing." Rel hesitated, just for a moment. Then he grabbed Kesser's arm, slung it over his shoulder, and screamed into his comms. "We need medevac! I'm not leaving anyone behind!" Outside, the extraction shuttle hovered just above the dust, side doors open, bullets hammering its sides as Naya waved frantically. "Let's go! Let's go!" Rel burst from the tunnel seconds before the charges went off. The explosion was like a god roaring. The ground lifted beneath them. The tether's base erupted, sending shards of alien alloy hundreds of feet into the air. The great spine bent, slowly, painfully, before snapping at the mid-joint. The structure twisted as it fell, crashing across the landscape like a collapsing skyscraper from the stars. Above, hundreds of Drek ships flickered and dimmed, severed from their lifeline. The sky, for the first time in weeks, started to clear. Inside the shuttle, Kesser passed out from blood loss, but he was alive. Barely. Marcus's voice came through the radio a moment later. "You did it." Rel leaned back, shaking, covered in blood and dust. "No," he said softly. "We did." And the world, for one perfect second, felt like it might belong to the living again. The fall of the orbital tether sent shock waves, literal and figurative, across the entire planet. Every Drek system connected to it flickered. Ship coordination collapsed. Supplies stopped moving. Communication between their surface forces and orbital command was severed. The once invincible Drek war machine started to stutter like a giant bleeding out through 1,000 cuts, and for the first time in recorded history, the Drek retreated. Not strategically, not to regroup. They ran. Across cities that once bowed in silence, Zalari fighters poured out from hiding places, ambushing patrols. Human gunships swept overhead, laying fire down like divine retribution. Liberation zones bloomed like wildfire across the continents. Even the old Zalari elders, who had long abandoned the idea of resistance, took up arms to guard their villages. But victory didn't come easy. The Drek's desperation made them more reckless. They started targeting entire regions with viral bombs, leaving corpses bloated in their homes. Other units turned suicidal, strapping explosives to themselves and charging into camps. It became clear to Marcus, and to Rel, that this wouldn't end until they cut the head off the beast. And that head was General Vurak, the Drek warlord who had overseen the invasion from orbit. He hadn't left the planet since the war began. He was somewhere deep beneath the earth, in a fortress carved into the bones of a dead mountain, guarded by tech the humans hadn't cracked, and soldiers who didn't fear death. Rel stood at the war table in the new field command center, a former Drek prison camp now converted into a base. The air reeked of smoke and solder, and maps covered every inch of the walls. Marcus pointed at the mountain, labeled Drenzakal in trembling red ink. "He's there. That's where it ends." The room was quiet. No one said what they were all thinking. It was a suicide mission. The mountain was rigged with defense towers, plasma artillery, and kill corridors. It wasn't a base. It was a tomb waiting to be sealed shut behind anyone foolish enough to enter. But Marcus just said, "We go in. We kill Vurak. We rip out the rot." Rel looked across the room at the young Zalari fighters watching him. He had trained many of them himself in the weeks following the tether's destruction. They were scared, yes, but they were angry. Determined. So he nodded. "I'll go." And like always, Marcus didn't try to stop him. He just said, "Then I'm going too." The assault on Drenzakal began at dawn. 12 dropships carrying the best of both human and Zalari forces skimmed the mountainside under low cloud cover. Cloaked drones flew ahead, disabling radar and mines. Anti-air turrets were jammed just long enough for the dropships to slip through. Rel rode in the lead ship, Kesser beside him, his leg now replaced with a cybernetic brace the humans had rushed to build for him. "You sure about this?" Kesser asked, tightening the strap on his rifle. No, Rel replied. But when has that ever stopped us? They hit the ground fast and hard. The mountain shook with the opening barrage. Explosions rippled through the outer walls. Human EMP rounds knocked out half the defense grid in the first 2 minutes. But the Drek were waiting. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, emerged from tunnels and bunkers, screaming, firing, bleeding as they fought. They didn't hold back. They didn't plan to survive. Rel fired until his hands ached. Plasma bolts singed the air inches from his face. One Zalari fighter beside him was blown in half. Another was stabbed by a Drek blade before even drawing her weapon. It was madness. But they kept moving forward, room by room, floor by floor, every step a new death sentence, until finally they reached the heart of the mountain. A vast chamber hollowed out by machines, with molten heat radiating from deep vents and a massive throne of black steel at its center. And there he was, General Vurak, twice the size of a normal Drek, armor like obsidian, eyes glowing with cruel intelligence. He rose slowly, deliberately, and spoke in a voice that shook the stone. "You think you've won?" he growled. "You insects have delayed the inevitable. We are eternal." Marcus stepped forward. "Eternal this, asshole." He opened fire. Vurak charged. The chamber erupted into chaos. Rel rolled aside just as the warlord's axe shattered the ground where he'd stood. Kesser threw a grenade that barely slowed the brute. Human soldiers flanked him, unloading full clips, most of it bouncing off his shielded body. Reel climbed a scaffold on the wall, grabbing a long-forgotten Drek rifle left by a fallen guard. He aimed for the warlord's back, where the armor plates curved and exposed a small gap between neck and shoulder. He fired. The shot hit. Vurak stumbled. Marcus rushed in, blades in both hands, and drove them deep into the wound. The Drek howled and spun, but Rel was already moving, leaping down, plasma knife in hand. He landed hard, right beside the warlord, and plunged the blade into Vurak's throat. There was a roar, a collapse, a scream, and then silence. Vurak fell. The war had turned. The fall of General Vurak did not echo across the stars the way it should have. It exploded. Within hours of his death, Drek command fractured. Their chain of leadership, so tightly wound around Vurak's absolute authority, crumbled like glass under pressure. Orders stopped flowing. Reinforcements froze in orbit. Ground units, stripped of coordination, began to scatter in confusion. Some fought to the last. Others abandoned their posts, hijacked ships, and fled. The humans didn't give them the chance. What followed wasn't a war. It was a purge. Strike teams swept across the planet with cold precision, targeting remaining pockets of resistance, dismantling what the Drek had spent decades building in weeks. Human warships once circling the atmosphere like sentinels now descended, dropping supplies, food, medical tech. They brought engineers, communication specialists, and diplomats. But more than that, they brought witnesses. The galaxy had seen the Drek as unchallengeable for generations. They had conquered countless worlds, erased entire species, broken empires. And now, one of those conquered races, with humanity at its side, had brought them to their knees. For the Zalari, it was liberation. For the Drek, it was humiliation. Rel stood on a high ridge above the plains of Vessen, where once a Drek command center had loomed. Now there was nothing but scorched soil and scattered bones. The wind blew calmly for the first time in years. No smoke, no gunships, just peace. Behind him, camps were being rebuilt. Zalari families returned to their ancestral homes. Children that had only known life underground came up and blinked at the sun for the first time. Human volunteers helped reconstruct towns brick by brick, and Marcus stood there beside him, arms crossed, armor traded in for a utility vest and worn boots. You did it, Marcus said quietly. Reel chuckled under his breath. You keep saying that, but it never felt like I did anything. Just survived. Marcus turned to him. That's the point. Surviving is winning. You made them bleed. You made them run. You reminded the whole galaxy what a conquered race can do when someone fights with them instead of for them. Rel didn't reply right away. He watched as a young Zalari girl handed a piece of fruit to a human soldier, who smiled awkwardly and tried to eat it without knowing what it was. He smiled. Maybe we finally stop calling it our planet or your army, Rel said. Maybe from now on, we call it what it really is. Marcus raised an eyebrow. And what's that? A shared victory. There was a long silence, broken only by the rustle of tents in the breeze. Then a low hum filled the air. In the sky above them, dozens of new ships emerged from the clouds. Not warships, not scouts, civilian carriers, medical cruisers, refugee transports, ships filled with the displaced, the wounded, the forgotten, people coming home. Earth's opening the corridor, Marcus said. Word got out. There are more like you, more survivors. Zalarian hiding across the sector. They're coming back. Rel's throat tightened. So many had died. So many names carved into stone, lost to plasma, disease, and fire. But this was the part no one had imagined. They won. The Drek were still out there, somewhere in the dark, still powerful, still cruel. But now they knew fear. Now they remembered pain. And now the galaxy remembered something it had long forgotten. When humans arrived, they didn't bring mercy. They brought fire, they brought resistance, they brought hell. But most of all, they brought hope. And hope, once ignited, was impossible to kill.